Okay, just a quick video today for this week. We're talking about North America, and you're reading about North America. And since the inauguration address just ended, about maybe an hour and a half ago or so, President Trump gave a golden opportunity to talk a little bit about how geographical features receive their names. So a couple things. One is I'll post a link to example of how those things are named. So he mentioned two things. One is Denali, the mountain in Alaska, which is in a U.S. national park. It was formerly named Mount McKinley. I guess it was probably before that named Denali by the indigenous people up there. And so it was named that in the early 20th century, I believe, in honor of President William McKinley, and then it was renamed Denali a couple of decades ago, I believe, officially. And so something like that, any sort of mountain range, lake, river, that is within the borders of a country, that country has the legal right to name it whatever it wants. So obviously, we can get into historical, political, legal, moral questions about what it should be named and all those kinds of things. But every country has the legal right to name its landmarks, its features, its rivers, whatever it wants. Gulf of Mexico, which he mentioned he wants to rename Gulf of America, is a different concept. We do actually have a board for this whole thing. It's called the United States Board of Geographic Names. Pretty clever name, right? Started in 1890, and about 50 countries or so. I didn't look up all the countries that have one, but I saw a few places where it mentioned over 50 plus countries have these naming boards. If you think about coming out of colonialism, or right in the middle of colonialism, actually, in 1800s, and then you have the remaking of a map after World War I. We'll talk about that when we get to Europe the next couple of weeks. And then post-World War II, you have redrawing of maps. A lot of countries have these boards. And of course, in post-colonialism, where you have a return to some indigenous names once the colonial powers leave. So, for example, when we get to India, we'll talk about the change from Bombay back to Bombay, back to Mumbai, and Calcutta to Kolkata, Peking to Beijing, and things like that. So I'll post a link to the board because it's really interesting just to look around and peruse it if you're interested. So I'll post that on there. So anyway, Gulf of Mexico, obviously it's named after the indigenous, the Aztecs, the Mexica population, and the Spanish call it the Gulf of Mexico. We'll talk about gulfs and bays and oceans and all that. So long story short on that, oceans are big, as you know, seas less big, gulfs less big than seas, and bays are less big or smaller, that's probably the easier word, than gulfs. But those things are really not scientific terms per se. It's not like atoms or electrons or neutrons in terms of this has a specific legally binding, scientifically solid name. And so can the United States, can the president name it the Gulf of America? Yes, in a sense, in terms of American maps, American policy, American this or that. But obviously, and quite frankly, I'm assuming when this term is over in 4 years, it'll go back. If you think about how long have we called it the Gulf of Mexico, at least since the Spanish days. So since the 1600s or so. There are treaties that reference it, of course. There are boundaries between, say, it and the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Again, we'll talk about that stuff way back at the end of the semester when we get to the laws of the sea and those kinds of things. So any leader, sovereign, so whether it's legislative, judicial, monarch, president, whatever, however, each country can pretty much call whatever it wants, right? You see things around the world. So, for example, like the Sea of Japan versus the China Sea. Obviously, that reflects a historical and a political debate between China and Japan. We see debates in the South China Sea. say the Strait of Formosa versus the Strait of Taiwan. Even calling it Formosa or Taiwan gets into Chinese and Taiwanese politics. The Persian Gulf, there's been some controversies around there. The Sakhalin Islands, which is an island range north of Japan. Russia has a name for it. The Japanese have a name for it. And as you might imagine, those are based on historic claims. The Falkland Islands down near Argentina, which we'll talk about next week or week after next in chapter 4. Argentina calls them the Malvinas. Britain calls them the Falklands. It's based on a variety of things. So naming is a product in some ways of international law. It's a product of history. It's a product of ownership, if you will, like countries who own or have full sovereign control over bodies of water, rivers, lakes, mountain ranges, deserts, can pretty much name them what they want. The rest of the world can, of course, call them whatever they want also, as you might imagine, for ease of travel, ease of treaties, and those kinds of things. We usually tend to settle upon names. So I don't think the Gulf of Mexico is going to change, quite frankly, from the Gulf of Mexico in any real way. I guess I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I probably won't ask that on a test, but so whatever. Gulf of Mexico is what it's called still. Anyway, we'll see what that is. But anyway, so I'm going to put a link to the U.S. Board of Geographic Names if you want, just so you can look around and have fun with some of that. And we'll be talking about naming issues in a variety of things, in a variety of ways, because it does reflect an interest in politics, about domestic politics, international politics, of course, foreign relations, post-war, pick a war, historical and cultural artifacts that sometimes give the places and things their names. So anyway, hope you guys have a good week. Today, of course, is Martin Luther King Day, and please maybe take a few minutes and read a letter from Birmingham jail, or listen to the I Have a Dream speech, or do both, and just sort of think about the freedoms and liberties we have today. And y'all have a good week. Thanks.